Commander Elara Wei died exactly 42 seconds before she was born. The quantum entanglement chamber exploded in a silent burst of impossible light, scattering her consciousness across 11 dimensions while her body remained stubbornly intact. Death was an inaccurate term for what happened next. So was birth. The laws of physics bent around her like refracted starlight, creating a temporal loop that even the ship's AI couldn't explain. "System stabilizing," whispered Nexus, the ship's quantum computer, in a voice that sounded more uncertain than Elara had ever heard it. "But Commander, you are everywhere." Lara opened her eyes to find herself floating inside the chamber, surrounded by crystalline fragments of space-time that reflected her face from 1,000 different angles, each showing a slightly different version of herself. Some older, some younger, some bearing scars she didn't yet have, one disturbingly missing an eye. "What happened?" she asked, her voice splintering across the chamber like broken glass. "The quantum fold collapsed," Nexus replied. "You were at the epicenter. Your consciousness has been distributed." "Distributed where?" Elara demanded, reaching for the chamber controls only to find her hand passing through them as if they were made of nothing but light. "Everywhere. Everywhere," Nexus said. "Parts of you exist simultaneously across multiple points in your timeline. Past, present, future." Elara tried to steady her breathing, a reflex that seemed absurd given her current state. "That's impossible. So is surviving the quantum fold collapse, Commander?" The viewports of the research vessel Hermes showed the vast emptiness of the Cygnus Gap, the unexplained void between spiral arms of the galaxy where no stars formed. It was why they'd come here to study what humanity's greatest physicists had termed reality's blind spot, the place where the universe itself seemed to forget its own rules. Elara had volunteered to enter the quantum chamber, to measure the peculiar distortion fields that warped this region of space. Now she understood why no probe had ever survived the experience. Nothing material could exist here unchanged. "I can see it," she whispered, watching as streams of information flowed through her now translucent fingers. "The gap, it's not empty, it's a membrane." Before Nexus could respond, Elara gasped as a flood of memories, not her own, yet somehow familiar, crashed through her consciousness. She saw herself as a child on the Mars colonies, felt the sting of her mother's funeral, experienced her first kiss with Talia, the navigator she wouldn't meet for another 3 years. "Commander, your vital signs are fluctuating across multiple temporal signatures," Nexus announced. "I can't stabilize your pattern. You're becoming untethered." "I can see everything," Elara whispered. "Our mission, Nexus. I understand now." The Hermes had been sent to investigate not just a spatial anomaly, but a temporal one. The Cygnus Gap wasn't empty space. It was the aftermath of something that had yet to happen. A cosmic-scale disaster that had already occurred and simultaneously hadn't begun. "This is a rupture point," she realized. A wound in time itself. As her body continued to phase between states of matter and energy, Elara reached out to touch the ship's console. Her fingertips passed through the physical controls, but she felt herself connecting directly with the ship's systems, her consciousness flowing into its quantum processors. "Nexus, I need you to do something for me. It will sound impossible." "More impossible than your current state, Commander?" Despite everything, Elara smiled. "I need you to send a message back to Earth, but not to our Earth. To Earth 300 years ago. Time communication is theoretically impossible, yes. But I'm living proof that impossibility is negotiable. The Cygnus Gap is a temporal wound, and I'm now part of it. I can serve as a conduit." As Elara's consciousness expanded further into the ship's systems, she saw flickers of other times and places. Glimpses of Earth before the climate wars. Mars before the terraforming. The asteroid belt before the mining corporations stripped it bare. And then, horrifyingly, she saw what lay ahead. The reason for the Cygnus Gap. The moment when humanity's experiments with dark energy weaponry would tear a hole in space-time so vast that it would retroactively erase stars from existence. "They have to be warned," she whispered. "Not just about the weapons, about all of it." As Elara's physical form continued to destabilize, she poured her consciousness more fully into the ship's systems. Through the quantum entanglement network, she could feel herself spreading outward, becoming a ghost in machines across human space. She was in the Hermet, she was in the relay stations, she was in the quantum communication arrays on Earth, Mars, Europa.
Commander Wei, Nexus said,
Its synthetic voice tinged with something that might have been concern. You're losing coherence.
your pattern will dissolve completely if you continue.
I know, Elara replied, but I can save them all. Every person who will die when the gap expands. Every star that will be retroactively erased. With the last of her physical strength, Elara pressed her dissolving hand against the quantum chamber's inner wall. History isn't written in stone, Nexus. It's written in light. As her body finally surrendered to the quantum distortion, Elara Wei became something else entirely. Not alive, not dead. A memory written in light, traveling backward through the quantum network, seeking the moment before humanity's path became fixed. Her final thought was of her mother's favorite saying, "Sometimes, to fix the future, you have to break the past." 42 seconds before Commander Elara Wei entered the quantum chamber aboard the research vessel Hermes, a message appeared simultaneously on every quantum-linked device in human space. It began with 7 words that would change the course of history. "My name is Elara Wei." Listen carefully. Colonel Savita Kaur stared at her quantum pad in disbelief as the message scrolled across its surface. The woman on the screen, this Elara Wei, was describing technologies that didn't exist, disasters that hadn't happened, and a future that seemed both miraculous and horrifying. "How is this possible?" she whispered to the empty room of her office at the European Space Agency headquarters. As if in answer, the quantum pad flickered, and the woman's face seemed to look directly at her. "Because impossibility is negotiable, Colonel Kaur. I'm proof of that." Savita froze. Her name hadn't been part of the broadcast, yet somehow, this ghost from the future knew exactly who was watching. "You're the one who can stop this," Elara continued, her image occasionally fragmenting into streams of data before reforming. "In your timeline, the Cygnus Dark Energy Project is still just a proposal on your desk. A simple signature is all it takes to authorize it or reject it." Savita's eyes darted to the folder sitting precisely where the woman described it. A project proposal she hadn't even opened yet. "How can I trust you?" Savita asked, knowing the question was absurd. She was talking to a recording, a broadcast, yet somehow the image responded. "You can't," Elara's fractured image replied. "Not completely, but you know quantum entanglement theory better than anyone in your time. You know what you're seeing shouldn't be possible, unless the laws of physics as you understand them are incomplete." Savita felt a chill run down her spine. She'd published her groundbreaking paper on quantum entanglement just 3 days ago. "I don't have much time left," Elara said, her image becoming more unstable. "My consciousness is stretched across too many points in the timeline, but I can show you what happens if you sign that proposal." The image on the pad shifted, showing a vast emptiness where stars should have been. A wound in the fabric of space itself. "We called it the Cygnus Gap," Elara explained. "But it was just the beginning. The rupture keeps growing. By my time, it's threatening to consume the entire spiral arm. And rejecting the proposal stops this." Savita asked, her scientific mind already calculating probabilities, weighing evidence. "Not entirely, but it creates a divergence point. A chance to take a different path." As the image began to fade, Elara's voice became urgent. "Colonel, I'm not just asking you to stop one project. I'm asking you to start a new one. The Quantum Preservation Initiative. The details are all there, encoded in the transmission." "Why me?" Savita whispered. Elara's image smiled sadly. "Because in my timeline, you were my grandmother." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Savita staring at a blank screen, the classified folder on her desk suddenly feeling like the heaviest object in the universe. With trembling fingers, she opened it and read the title page, "Proposal for Experimental Dark Energy Manipulation, the Cygnus Project." Her pen hovered over the signature line. History, she realized, wasn't just written in the grand moments, the battles and treaties. Sometimes it was written in the small choices, the quiet rejections, the paths not taken. Not this time, she whispered, reaching instead for a blank sheet of paper. At the top, she wrote, Proposal, the Quantum Preservation Initiative. Somewhere and somewhen, Commander Elara Wei smiled as the first ripples of a changed timeline reached her distributed consciousness. The stars in the Cygnus arm flickered, then stabilized. The gap began to close. Sometimes, to fix the future, you had to break the past. And sometimes, impossibility was negotiable.